Welcome, Zainab Daodu. Is that how you call it? Name?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, all right. So happy to have you on today's podcast. So our topic for today is basically the question of technical writing. The docs are part of the product. I like that topic. I like that topic
I
because
do too.
for technical guys, sometimes you are just zooming into the coding, and when the code is finished and the product is out, we feel that that's the end. But
Mm.
you seem to have a different opinion about that. So, what does the docs are part? I mean, first of all, let's introduce yourself first, and then we'll dive into that topic. So, if you want.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Bernard. Thank you for having me. So, hi, everyone. My name is Zainab Daodu. I'm a senior technical writer. I've spent quite a number of years working on documentation for enterprise organization. Before that, I was a software developer working on building payment APIs, and that was where I found I discovered the importance of having good user experience that comes from documentation. And that was why I transitioned to technical writing. Since I started working as a technical writer, I've contributed to open source organizations like Wikimedia, Jenkins, documenting Jenkins on Kubernetes. And as a tech writer, I've worked for organizations like Google, Tilium, Cisco, amongst the others. So yeah, I'm super excited to be here. And aside that also, I'm the founder of WriteTech Hub. WriteTech Hub is a tech writing organization, provide consulting services for businesses. And we also, have community initiatives to help technical writers upskill. Amongst that is our accelerator program to help technical writers gain the necessary skills they need, and our writing boot camps. So super excited to be here. And thank you so much for having me.
Google, Tilium, and you mentioned that you were actually in software development, so you were actually embedded in the code writing yourself. So
Yes,
is it
yes.
that you are running away from the code writing and then leaving everything to us, or what?
Well, I will not say really run away, but part of what we are going to talk about is how you see that you can build a really good product even as a developer, but then it's still not achieving the value that the product is supposed to achieve, or it's not getting adopted as much as you would expect from what you've built. And this is where documentation comes in, and that is what I saw as a developer. And I had to choose between continue, because I couldn't do both, kind of like working as a developer and tech writer. So I decided, okay, I wanted to, because then it wasn't something that was much very visible as it is today. So I decided, okay, I wanted to go more into this and kind of help to improve the experience, so that this great product that we are building can actually get used as it should. And so that was just what drove me into it.
Wow, wow. I think my nerves are calmed down. That now that I know that run away from us. But you said something that really,
Mm.
really, really strikes a chord, because one of the podcasts I had with another founder, which by the way I'm going to upload onto our channel for our viewers and for everyone. They have a very great product, and one of the challenges that he told me was basically how to get the users or the potential customers to understand the product and actually use it, even though the product is good. I think that is where your technical writing stuff comes in, so that users, like you just mentioned, actually be able to understand the benefit of the product. So anyway, I don't know. I don't know what technical writing it is. I know maybe not write about the stuff. So what does the docs are part of the product? What does that mean to you and to write tech how?
Okay, so when you say docs are part of products, to me, it just means literally that. So it means that the documentation is not just an accessory or an add-on to the product. It is a part of how the product is experienced. So what I'm trying to say is, if a user cannot understand how to set up something, how to use your product, how to troubleshoot issue, then the product is incomplete at the end of the day, no matter how good the underlying technology is. And at WriteTech Hub, we see documentation as product infrastructure and a part of the user experience, not just a side deliverable. So it determines whether a user succeeds or gives up, whether they trust your product or they feel frustrated. And documentation answers a lot of questions about your product before your user even have to start reaching out to support to ask them and things like that. So a lot of times when documentation is missing, or unclear, the users see that, oh, this product is too difficult, even when sometimes it's not even the product itself. And this tells you like how tightly they are connected to each other. So when companies or when organizations say this product is ready, my follow-up question is usually like, ready for who? Because if your documentation is not ready, then the product is not ready for real users.
Wow. Wow. Those are nuggets. Documentation are not accessories. They are not like an
No,
add-on. They are
no,
part of the
of the
product.
product.
And you
Yeah.
said that documentation as what? As infrastructure.
Yeah.
Wow. 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 So, okay. So what are, so you mentioned that when the company say the product is ready,
Mm.
for your follow-up question as a writer, content writer, I mean, technical content writer, is where is the documentation? Like, who is the
Yeah,
documentation?
exactly.
Wow. Okay. So why do you think, like, and what are some of the misconceptions and that companies have about this documentation to the extent that they can say product is ready and then there's no documentation? Why do you think that?
Okay. So there are a lot of misconceptions that companies have about documentation. I will start like with the major one that is going on now, because as the ecosystem is kind of like, growing and advancing, companies are beginning to understand the importance of documentation and that they need documentation, but there are still some misconceptions. The first major one I would say is around AI, around the advent and the coming of AI. So a lot of organizations now assume that AI will replace technical writers, or that technical writers should magically now do 10 times more work because AI exists. And what actually happens in practice is not exactly like that, because yes, AI can help speed up things, but it cannot replace context. It cannot replace, judgment, product understanding, and a lot of other things. And if your documentation is unclear at the source, or whatever source information you are giving to AI is not clear or is not correct, AI will just help you produce unclear content faster that people are going to still have issues with at the end of the day. And that is why you still need writers. And then another misconception is that documentation is just writing. In reality, like, a lot of work comes from, tech writers, asking questions, spotting gaps in product thinking, and kind of like just pushing for clarity, like talking to SMEs, trying to get like knowledge and information from them, which all of these things happen before you even begin to start writing. In truth, writing is like one of like the easiest parts in the process of tech writing. And that is why when you give engineers or when you give other people documentation to write, you find out that there are a lot of issues, because it's not just the writing. There are a lot of other things that are involved to create good documentation. And finally, a lot of organization thinks that docs are needed only after launch or after the product is complete. That mindset leads to, reactive documentation that is rushed, and, it causes a lot of issues, because then you have to be finding out how to explain something that should not even be in the first place if you had been involved from the beginning. So I'll say like those are some misconceptions that I have seen, like with that companies have about documentation.
Wow. Wow. It's not as if you are talking to me directly. You're talking to some of us in tech directly. Because like what you just mentioned, like we sometimes think documentation comes after we finish writing, and you are telling us that that is reactive writing.
Yes.
Can you expand on that? Like, so how is it supposed to be done? Like,
When I say reactive, so anything, whatever it is that you have with you, whether it makes sense or not, you just have to like document it. But then as a writer, if you are involved early on in the process, like right from when you're doing the product design, and things like that, we have something called like UX writing. Even like from like the terminology you use in your products and all that, you have the chance to kind of like, give chime in on those kind of things, gives your perspective. You already have like the user in mind, you have the end goal in mind. You can give, advice and your input based on those things, so that at the end of the day, when you're writing your documentation, it's much easier. And even you yourself, you understand the why a lot of things are happening. But then when you're writing documentation after the product is ready, everything is shipped, and they're just giving you okay, document this. Sometimes you're asking a question and just you don't even understand why it's happening that way, and you really can't get the answer, but you just have to put it down that way. So even you yourself sometimes don't even believe in what you're writing, but you just have to write it like that because that is the way it is, and you have to put it down for users. But then when you're involved early and you can change those things, and then at the end of the day, your documentation is much more effective for your users.
I mean, there are a lot of things that you've touched on that. I had a series of questions planned, but the point that you are raising, like I can't just skip those points and just move to those questions, right? I think you mentioned something like companies expect, like companies think that one, like tech writing is just writing content. And also mentioned that one of the misconceptions is companies think that AI is going to replace technical writers. But I think another thing that you also mentioned, I'm just mentioning that those kind of points for myself, and also obviously I believe my audience, good listeners, I also have those kind of questions. So you also mentioned that the writing should be part, like everything that comes to mind at the time that you're developing the product, you should jot them down. That reminds me of one of my managers. He said, just jot everything down and later we can clean up. So at what point, like you as a tech writer hub, at what point should companies sort of engage you? Is it the time that they are building the product, or like at what stage do they engage your service if they are engage your service for their product?
So I would say as early as possible, like ideally, maybe even during design or planning, when you're planning about, the product planning and all that, before you even get into your sprint and all that, not not during release, because when you involve writer during design or early development, we can help shape things like even terminology, like how do you name certain things in the product, workflow, user journeys, things that we would have to document at the end of the day. We can make input on those things early on in the product if it doesn't make sense. And this helps to, prevent confusion or reduce rework at the end of the day. Because when you wait until the end, it means that you have missed up on opportunities for you to improve, like the clarity of your product right from the beginning. And then you just have to kind of like work with whatever you have to, or kind of like rework. Because I've seen it a lot of times. I wrote an article recently about when writing well stopped being enough, because early on in my career, I was working on documenting things that were already ready. Like when I worked on Jenkins, on Kubernetes and things like that, these were products that have been built a long time ago and you're just documenting. And when you're in the process of documentation, you find that you are struggling, but you don't understand why you are struggling. It's because there are issues with the product, or with decisions that were made right from time that you have no control over. And then you find yourself writing steps upon steps, and trying to kind of like, write long documents and things like that to just kind of like help explain things that you could have been able to prevent if you had been part of the process early on, and be like, oh no, let's not do it this way. Because you're already thinking of how am I going to explain this to the user, which is not something that people that are building the product are thinking about. So you see that different perspective is very valuable early on from the design, and it helps you to avoid all those like long journeys and rework that you have to do later on.
Wow, wow, wow. It looks like technical writing is, I mean, I think I've adapted that phrase. It's part of the product. But
It is.
I'm still not convinced yet. I still want to get more. So
All right.
what is the real world examples like in your, I mean, I know you mentioned like working with Jenkins, working in Kubernetes and stuff, but to you, what are some of the real world examples where you think that technical writing, documentation stuff have directly impacted the adoption of a particular product on the market?
Okay. So I've worked on when I was working let me even give example when I was working as a software developer, because that's actually what even made me go into tech writing, developer experience. So they were serving like banks initially and not developers. And the product was good. It's something that was being used. But then it got to like trying to serve developers, like, okay, this APIs are good and we want developers to benefit from it. But then adoption was slow, and the initial assumption is like, oh, developers don't like the product, or it's too hard, for developers. But this is something that have been used by banks and, or like, other organizations, and they are like this is really good, really adopting it. So why is it that it got to the point of developers and, developers are like, oh, this thing is too hard and all that. But then when we now looked closer, you find out that people do not even the developers were not even getting past setup, and the issue was like, they just didn't know how to navigate it because there was no like clear documentation. When we're serving banks and all that, we are sharing like things like PDFs, they have closer support. And then, the number of banks you're serving is smaller in compared to like the number of developers now that are going to integrate. And you cannot keep explaining the same thing over and over and over and over to all the developers that are going to integrate. Whereas when you're doing it with banks, you have fewer people. So it's much easier for you. And this is when the gap of documentation surfaced. Like the issue is like, we need somewhere to put in all this information that we have been explaining over calls and all that. We need to put it somewhere. And that's why that project came up for like developer experience. And I was put on the project, like, let's consolidate our documentation. And we did that. We didn't change the product at all. We didn't touch the product. We just restructured the documentation, put it in one place, clarified any assumptions, add realistic examples, explain any possible failure points, put everything in one place that people can access it. And after that, the support cases were reducing. People began to, integrate more and more. The community started growing. And we could clearly see like, oh, this is the impact of documentation. And this is how important documentation is to product adoption.
Wow. 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 So it wasn't like the product was bad. It wasn't like the product was not good. It was just the miscommunication. It was just a
Exactly.
lack of clear-cut documentation for developers. And I have experienced this kind of thing, and I believe most of you also experience this kind of thing, where when I'm trying to adopt a product or a tool, and I look at the documentation and it's kind of scanty, I don't find my way out. I either give up or maybe run to maybe YouTube
Exactly.
anywhere to find it clear. But when you look at some products that
Exactly.
have very good documentation, it's very easy to adopt. Wow.
Mhm.
Wow. Wow. So I know you touched on how the onboarding experience of these developers were very difficult, but then later on when you improve the documentation, it became very like they were able to adapt quicker, and then the what do you call it, the user base grew, the community grew, the support tickets, reduced and everything like that. So that's a very big impact. But what I want to find out is what does effective collaboration? Because you mentioned that
Mm.
when um, technical writing is not just writing, you
Mm.
actually consult, you actually have discussion with a team, which is different from somebody just putting out content. You actually have discussion, like you have to discuss with a team. So how does collaboration, or what does effective collaboration between product teams and technical writers look like?
So, I would say effective collaboration means that writers are not treated as outsiders. That's one, because I've seen a lot of situations where writers are treated like outside of the product team and not part of the product, where, you have writers have access to like product discussions, design decisions, context, and not just like where it is only when something product is finished, you just tag a writer in there and be like, we need documentation on this. That is like not effective collaboration. Effective collaboration where you have them in the Slack groups where you're talking about like the design, or wherever it is that the engineering teams or product teams are communicating. Writers are also in this space and can see whatever is going on from the beginning. And the best teams that I've seen also treat tech writers as part of the product teams. So writers are involved in discussions early, as we've talked about. They understand why decisions are being made. And, they can ask questions without being seen as blockers, because that's another thing. I've been part of teams where sometimes you're scared to ask questions because you feel like, oh, this person has come again, where it is seen like, okay, this is really, really important. And this comes from, shared ownership. When product, engineering support understand that they all care about the same outcome, when they all care about the same outcome, which is users succeeding, users, being able to use the product, when everybody, all these different teams understand that we are all trying to achieve the same goal, including the writers, then they'll be ready to work together to achieve this shared goal and be ready to involve the technical writers and whatever views they have. When I was working, when I started my first experience as a tech writer, I struggled a bit. And this was where I worked as a developer also, like when I was working on tech writing projects, because you had to be explaining to people what your role is when you're even talking or acting like, who are you safe? Why, why are you disturbing us? Or what's the importance of all this? But it's very important, like having great collaboration between all these teams can only happen when the teams understand, the role and responsibility of everybody and understand that we are all trying to achieve the same thing. It's not just documentation. What is the importance of that documentation? So when the tech writer is asking questions or, like questioning product decision, they don't feel like this is not your place, or Chibi is just for you to document. They understand that, okay, this person really has value or really has the expertise to be able to question this decision. So that's when you have a effective collaboration between the teams.
Wow. Technical writers should not be treated as an afterthought. They should be part of the product right
Yeah.
from the onset.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good point. Tell me, what will be the cost of neglect if technical writers or technical writers like yourselves are omitted and treated as an afterthought?
Sorry, I didn't get that question.
I'm saying, what will be the cost of neglecting
Okay.
technical writers from the onset if they are only treated as an afterthought? Like we only bring you
Oh,
guys in, and then
okay.
even you're not allowed to ask questions. You only say, "Hey, keep quiet. Let's finish the product because we are busy." And then you're only treated as an afterthought. What is the cost of neglect here for everyone? For this,
Costs will definitely show up in so many other places. Let me start with support. Number one, support will get overwhelmed at the end of the day because the questions that should be answered in documentation would not get answered. And then they will get rerouted to support teams. And then they will have to start answering them over and over again. And then your support team will get overwhelmed. Secondly, also engineering teams will also get pulled to this. There's no way no how. I've seen this play out so many times. When support cannot answer the question or when support gets overwhelmed, it pours down to engineering teams. And then instead of engineering teams to focus on just building, then they now have to be providing support for the features they've already built and start answering questions from support or from users because there is no good documentation, or the documentation is there but it doesn't make sense, or it's too complex because even the technical writer does not even understand what is going on because they came in very late in the product. So it's even possible that the tech writer creates the documentation afterwards, but because they don't understand the why and so many things, the documentation is not really doing what it should, and the questions will still keep piling up. And then at the end of the day, your users too would get frustrated, they will lose confidence because every single thing that they have to do, they have to reach out to support, they have to be asking questions. They cannot and be able to achieve simple things on their own. So, and sometimes too, the teams will start blaming the users. The users are not technical enough. That's why they do not understand when that's not the problem. The problem is because you have unclear documentation. And over time, your poor documentation becomes technical debt. And just like technical debt, it increases quietly and it becomes really expensive. Every time you're adding a new feature, you're adding more confusion for users instead of you to add more features. And that's how it just keeps, expanding. So fixing it later or adding them later is always more expensive than just doing it right from the start.
wow, I never thought technical writing, omitting it and neglecting it can have such a devastating effect on products and companies, like right from users to the developers themselves. Wow, this is an eye opener. Okay, wow, wow. So that means we need a very big cultural shift in organizations. I mean, looking at the cost issues and even the benefit that you get. So how technical writers like yourself, WriteTechHub, and technical writers in general, how can you advocate for better tooling, workflows, and respect? How do you do that? What challenges have you facing, and what have you been doing, and how is the culture like?
So I would say advocacy starts with showing impact, not just asking for recognition. So as writers, we need to be able to demonstrate like how documentation adds business value, How does it improve onboarding? How does it improve like your support load? How does it drive better product adoption? When you are able to show all these things, like the example I gave from the beginning about, product adoption being slow or being low. And then when we worked on documentation, it was very clear how like adoption increased, support tickets increased. So when you're able to show these things, then you are able to, leadership would be ready to listen to you and provide whatever resources or whatever it is that you need, to be able to create better docs, because they can see the value. So, and when they can see all this thing, it's not just going to be about documentation. It's now about the product quality itself. That this, by doing this, you're increasing the quality of the product. As we have said, documentation is part of the product. So when I'm talking about documentation, I'm not talking about documents or just pages. I'm talking about the product itself, the value of the product. So, and we also need to show up, like we need to speak up in planning meetings, ask questions, and that's where we can advocate for ourselves. You see developers, when you have meetings and all that, talking about, what they need, and things like that. Writers also need to be able to speak up in those kinds of spaces also, to advocate for themselves and whatever it is that we need in terms of tooling, workflows, and all that. And then we need to also be confident in our role as problem solvers. So we are not just content producers or just there to write. We are there to solve a particular problem, and we need to advocate and we need to be confident in that. You should not just see yourself like, oh, I'm just writing the docs. Do not undervalue the work that you are doing, because it also starts with that. Some writers do not know the value of what they are doing, and if you don't see the value yourself, there's no way you can show that to other people too.
Wow. Wow. I like that. I think that's a big that is a duty call, I
Yeah.
think, which I think it's gonna take some time. But it's gonna need massive effort. And obviously it's gonna need education as well for product leaders, for company leaders to actually give the platform, allow the users, because eventually I think the users are the ones that are gonna customers are the ones that are gonna benefit when the product is really, really well explained and well documented. Right. I know that's a general or industry sort of challenge, that kind of cultural shift that we're pushing on. Let's talk about WriteTechHub.
Mhm.
What challenge in this, like, as a company growing up,
Mhm.
pushing the boundaries or trying to push this cultural shift? What would you say is the number one challenge that you're facing in terms of, making this shift in this industry?
So I would say the challenge we're trying to solve is kind of like building a community of writers that understand like everything we've talked about in terms of like the role of writing, and not just being documentation, but shaping the products, quality and user experience, building a community of writers that really understand this and the impact of documentation. So we have like a lot of communities, you have like a lot of trainings or a lot of information out there about technical writing, but kind of like really understanding the practical real world documentation work, what it really entails to be able to kind of like drive this adoption we are talking about, this great user experience, is what we are doing at WriteTech Hub. So we are training writers, to think beyond writing, but rather to be able to understand products, understand workflow, understand real user needs, because that's the only way that you can write to be able to satisfy those needs. You need to understand what is your user trying to achieve, with this particular product. So, and that's the only way you can even ask the right question from the beginning when you are building products. Like, okay, what's the user supposed to, what's the use case for this? Because sometimes it's about, oh, I'm building this cool product, this thing is really cool, it can do this and this and this and this and this. But then as a tech writer, you need to stop and think and be like, oh yes, it can do this. Is this really relevant to the user? What is the use case? Because anybody that is coming to use your product, they are not coming because they think this thing is shiny. They are coming because, oh, I want to do this and I want to use your product to do this. And that is what you are writing to tell them, okay, this is how you can do whatever it is you want to do with this particular product. So we are building a community that is helping writers to have this particular mindset have this user mindset. And we are also working with companies also to help them build documentation processes that can also scale, not just like one-off documentation. Even if we're not working with you today, or as your product continues to grow, how can it scale? And then we know also, like in terms of like hiring and all that, companies also struggle to get like these technical writers that can really make this impact, and not just write. So we are trying to help them solve this problem by training these writers and giving them access, to the writers. So through our boot camps, our accelerator program, we are helping to solve these gaps that we've seen in terms of like creating really great documentation that is part of the product. So, and the goal is not for us to just write better documentation, but our goal is to have stronger products that has better experiences for users.
Wow. So you are actually helping companies directly, and then you've realized that there's skill shortage of
Mhm.
well-qualified,
Mhm.
well-trained professionals who really understand what it means to be a technical writer,
Mhm.
and you are fixing that gap by
Yes.
training people with practical skills.
Yes.
And not only that, you're actually giving employment to these skilled people and
Yes.
making the work of companies and product owners and product
Yes.
developers easy.
Yes.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. How does somebody contact WriteTechHub?
Okay, so to contact WriteTech Hub, you can reach us on all our DM us on our social media handles. That's LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, whichever one, WriteTech Hub. And then you can also send an email to us, info@writetechhub.org, and we'll definitely respond.
I have really learned a lot today. I didn't know much about the importance and the benefit and the cost of even the neglect
Hmm.
of technical writing in what we do. I mean, for most of us, the engineers, what we call the just building, and as long as it's working, we think we are cool. And after you give it to somebody and the person is not able to use the product, and you think to yourself, what happened here? Not
Exactly.
knowing there is a missing link, which is technical writing, which just emphasizes, I think I'm now convinced that technical writing and the docs are part of the product. I now believe
Exactly.
that.
Because I mean, what's the essence of building something if people are not using it? Even you as a developer, you can't feel fulfilled if your product is just lying there and nobody is using it. And the default is not from you. It's not that you didn't build it right. It's just that something else is missing, which is really not your responsibility to think about when you think of it. So that's just what it is. And it also helps to kind of like, at the end of the day, when you think about it, if you involve writers early, it reduces the burden also on the developers, because when you involve them later, that means you are relying on the developers to kind of like document some things or share some, because you can't just tell them this feature is ready. You have to tell them, okay, this is how you use it, this is this. You have to tell them all for them to be able to document it. But when the writer is involved early, they can observe those things, ask questions, take their notes themselves, and all those things. And it reduces the burden on you at the end of the day to be answering all the numerous questions that they would have gotten answers to. And at the end of the day, everybody is happy. My product that I built is being used. Business is also happy. They are getting adoption, and all that. So it's a win-win for everybody at the end of the day.
Wow, awesome. Your final words.
Okay, so my final words would be to see for organizations to see like the importance of documentation and really make the changes, because a lot of people say these things, they know these things, but they are not really putting in the investments that they need to put in place to fix these things. So you can't have, for instance, 10 engineering teams building 50 products and then hire one technical writer and say, come and support all these engineering teams. Whatever investment you need to make in terms of tech writers, in terms of tools, also in terms of workflows, organizations should really look into that so that you can create great user experiences for your customers. And WriteTech Hub is here. If you need writers, if you need consultancy, you need us to work on the documentation, whatever it is, build processes for you, we are here to help you do that. We have the skills, we have the expertise to help you solve whatever your problem is in terms of like documentation and still products like needs at the end of the day for you to achieve maximum user experience and product adoption. Thank you.
Wow, I like that. So provide good experience for your users, and WriteTech Hub is the link to that. Okay. So yeah, on today's podcast, our guest has been Zainab Daodu, the CEO and founder of WriteTechHub.org. So if you need anything in terms of tech writing, and don't wait till your customers start abandoning your support staff and then cascading down to your developers. Involve technical writers, like competent ones like WriterHub, right at the beginning of your product development. Okay, thank you very much, Zainab, for taking time to talk to us. And we would like to host you some other time, because I think there were a lot of things that we could have covered, but we didn't have any more time. But I think we got so much value and time for sharing your knowledge with us. And hopefully we can catch up again at some other time. It'd be nice having you on here, Zainab.
You. One last thing, sorry. If you're a tech
Sure.
writer looking to upskill, please join our community. We have a lot of, high skilled, high level resources for you to help you upskill as a tech writer. So please join the community. It's on the website, writetechhub.org. You'll see our community somewhere on that page. Join the community and trust me, you will not regret it. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. I like that.
All right.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Have a nice day, and then
You
happy
too. All right.
to
Bye.
speak to you later. Bye.